Hi everyone, welcome to another video. Today I want to share with you how to do a little bit of Q-tip watercoloring with the Catherine Pooler inks. So Cracker Box and Susie Stamps, the shop is now carrying Catherine Pooler ink pads, which is so much fun. I was unsure about these inks and then I tried them and I absolutely fell in love with them. I am a mini ink pad girl, but these are amazing ink pads. So I did go ahead and purchase quite a few more, and I'm going to go ahead and complete the collection of these. They're just that fabulous. These are a dye ink. They're great for watercolor. They're great for ink blending. I mean, they work pretty much just like distress inks. You can even get a little bit of ink lifting with them like you do with your distress inks in water. They're just a very good ink. They're nice and juicy. I love the pad shape. They stack on top of each other, so the storage, if you just leave them like in a little box or something, or you can get ink storage for these. So I'm going to go ahead and do a little bit of watercolor with them, but I wanted to do this a little bit more of a fun and easy way with something that everybody has just in their house, which is Q-tips and water. So I'm using this willow stamp from Cracker Box and Susie Stamps, and I will do a little bit of selective inking. Now, if you don't know, Q-tips are great to have in your craft room. I went ahead and inked up the top of this willow tree with the green, the grass skirt ink, and then I didn't have like a very fine point on this, so I went ahead and just inked up where all the willow branches were, but I needed to remove a little bit of inks from the tree base itself. So I grabbed a Q-tip, sprayed it with a little bit of water, and I can come in and clean up all those areas that got the green ink on them where I didn't want it. I'll go ahead and stamp that down with my Misty. I am using my Misty here. If it takes a little bit longer for you to get this stamped image on there, just give it a little huff before you stamp it down. That way you know your ink is nice and wet. Now I'm going to go ahead and ink up the bottom of the tree with the icing on the cake, which is a brown dye ink. And I also am going to ink up just the very tips of the branches. Then I'm taking a dry cloth and I am just patting off the majority of that ink from the branches. This is just going to give a nice little bit of a brown look on the edge of the branches, just is a little bit more fun. Then on that tree stump, I'm going to go ahead and ink up a little bit more. I wiped away some of the ink, and then I can come back in with my cloth, clean up anywhere where I don't want that brown ink, and then for the more detailed parts, I can go ahead and take my Q-tip, again, spray it with a little bit of water, and then I can clean up wherever I don't want that ink in detail. This is just a great way to really get in those crevices whenever you're doing multiple inkings like this and you're using different colors. It's a great way to get in there, really get in those details. You can even get makeup Q-tips where it's more pointed on the end of it. You can find those at pretty much any store, and those are even more detailed. I'm using the basic round Q-tips for this. I'll go ahead and stamp that down once I've cleaned it up and got the ink where I want it. And I'm stamping these on regular cardstock. I've got an A2 sized white cardstock panel in my Misty that I'm stamping onto. I will trim this down in a little bit, but here's a closer look at that stamp all put together. Now whenever you stamp these inks first, they look a little splotchy. These are one of those inks that look pretty terrible when you put them on, but once they dry out and settle into the paper, they are just beautiful. I mean, the coverage on these is amazing. So once I had all the stamping done, it's time to come in and give this a little bit of a watercolor look, which is so easy to do with these inks. So I took a Q-tip, a clean one at this point, and I'm giving it spritzes of water. Then all I'm doing is coming in and rubbing over the top of those inks. Now I'm using this on regular watercolor paper. If you want more of a watercolor look and you want these to move a little bit more freely, do this on watercolor paper. It's going to give you a gorgeous look. Your colors are just going to move around a little bit better. I wanted mine to be a very light wash of color. That's why I did it on regular cardstock. But I have to be careful about pilling, especially when I'm rubbing over this with my Q-tip. It gets a little rough on the surface of your paper, so just make sure you're using a light hand. I went over all of the branches with my Q-tip, and then it was time to do the tree stump. Whenever you're switching to a new color, I would suggest switching to a dry or a new piece, new end of your Q-tip. And then I just spray it down with some water, and I come in and buff out those edges. Go right over the top and just kind of pull the color where you want it. You can see this is a very, very light wash of color, but it is gorgeous once it's all said and done. And it's a nice way for me to get that really light coloring look without all the work. Most of the time I have to go in with my chalk inks and do this, but with this I can just put a little water on a Q-tip, pull the color where I want it, and there I've got that nice soft wash of color. Now I wanted to add a little bit of grassy area underneath this tree and also a blue sky around this. So I grabbed my palette, which is just a piece of cardstock that I laminated. I put a little bit of that grass skirt ink on the palette, spritzed it with some water, and I'll pick it up with a Q-tip and just dot it right underneath that tree wherever I want it. I did the same thing with the It's a Boy ink, and I just put a little bit on my palette, smushed my ink pad on there, spritzed it with water, and I'm going to pick up that color with a Q-tip and just dot it on. This is such a quick way to get a nice little watercolor scene on my card without going into too much detail. I waited for the brown ink and the green ink on the tree to dry so they didn't mix and create any funny muddy colors, but these stayed pretty separate. I didn't have any problems with the bleeding or blending together. Once it was dry, it was pretty good to go. I added those few dots of color, and there I've got this gorgeous watercolor scene ready to be on my card. I grabbed this sentiment stamp from Cracker Box and Susie's Stamps. It's a sympathy, and I went ahead and inked this up with the same icing on the cake ink that I used on the tree base. I just thought going in with black would be a little bit too harsh for this, so I kept with the brown tones. I'll stamp this down with my Mini Misty again. On that same panel, I did measure this out to make sure I had enough room whenever I stamped that tree. And you can see just with one inking, I get this great detailed sentiment on my card. I don't have to worry about drying. I don't have to worry about rubbing this. It's not a pigment ink. It dries very quickly. It's great. I went ahead and cut that panel down, and I cut a craft mat to go behind that panel. I wanted to add a little something extra to that craft mat, so I took a stitching die and just popped that on both edges of my craft mat. I took my little tree panel here. I added some double-sided adhesive to the back of it, and I'll go ahead and mount that on the craft panel that I added the stitching detail to. Now I know I'm not listing supply, or I'm not naming all the supplies I'm using here, but if you have any questions about supplies like the stitching dies I'm using here, they're always going to be linked down in the description box below, so you can always find exactly what products I use down there. And sometimes I use products that aren't available. If they aren't available anymore, I always find something similar, if not almost exactly the same, and list that down below, but I'll always put a little note in there that it's not exactly what I used. Now I went ahead and placed a little bit more double-sided adhesive on the back of that tree and craft panel, popped that on an A2 top folding card base, and the outside of this card was done. It was just time to do the inside. I stamped that Thinking of You, again from Cracker Box and Susie Stamps, with the icing on the cake ink right on the inside of the card. And then I took that same willow stamp, inked the whole thing up with icing on a cake, and I'm going to do second generation stamping right over that sentiment. So I stamped off once with my little stamp, and then I'll go ahead and place it right over the sentiment and stamp it without re-inking. This is going to give me a lighter version of that ink color. It looks like a ghosted image. It's just beautiful to do on the inside of cards where you want something really simple, but you want to tie the whole thing together. It's great to just take a stamp, do second generation stamping on the inside, and you've got a gorgeous inside of the card. All you need to do is add your signature and a little message. You're good to go. That does it for the card today. Here's a few final looks. I hope you guys enjoyed this technique. It was a lot of fun to play around with, and it's so simple and easy to do, and I love using supplies where I don't have to go buy anything new. It's already in my house. That does it for me today. On the left side of your screen, there are going to be a few more links you can click on. You can also subscribe to my channel if you haven't already over there. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up down below. Thank you guys for watching, and happy crafting!